really inspired and continue to be inspired by the bookbinding that you can find in ancient Egypt, and just these beautiful Coptic ways of binding books. And with every journal I create, the string I use to seal off the spine, I coat in beeswax. So I'm graced to use some locally sourced beeswax to seal that string, and paper that friends of mine have made as the cover of all of my journals. My name is Michelle Marie. My creative process, I feel, is more of a daily ritual. It begins when I rise. I like to start my day, and therefore just my thought process, with a warm cup of tea and some form of self-care, whether it be meditation or yoga or simply laying in bed for a little longer. It depends on the day, it depends on the mood, but I really feel like if I hone in my self-care and the ritualistic aspect of that, then my creative process can flourish. I find that if I'm feeling strong and loved and nourished by myself, that it really just creates space for there to be creation. I think that through creative self-expression, I've really just learned more about myself and therefore more about my community, because I see not only myself, but through the skills I've gathered over my life so far, which has been a blessing, and I'm excited to keep up that sort of explorative process of growth, I guess.
What is something you think is a lost art that you would love to see revived?
Something that just comes to mind is the art of rewilding. So to me, that lands in the sense of connecting with Gaia or Mother Earth more, but in the frame of creation. That could just be being outside as you journal, or creating wild pigments. I think earth and pigments is really quite a beautiful art and a way to connect on a very intimate level with the medium we're working with. So, collecting ochre, collecting clay. As some of you may know, we're in the Carolinas, so there's a high content of clay out here. So it can be a really beautiful practice to just go into the woods or the backyard or wherever you might have noticed exposed clay, exposed earth, and just play, experiment, and maybe you can create a paint or a pigment to express yourself and thoughts with. There's just something for me that's really, I can't confine in words, I guess, but there's something really organic, and empowering, invigorating about nature and how I am a creature. I am nature. There really seems to be very little separation there, especially with art, with this kind of raw, animalistic way that we can connect with ourselves to explain things that words or literature even can't. Not to say that literature and words is not art, but so yeah, again with the voice, I feel like when I'm connecting with nature and nature through art, I'm connecting with this voice within myself that maybe exceeds or is far greater than just me or the singular I. As I mentioned earlier, earth and pigments are really incredible. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of taking a course with Wild Pigment Project online and learned how to process ochre and various natural pigments, which was a big inspiration. So that kind of led way to me being able to now make my own oil paints that have no toxic or synthetic materials in them and that are safe for me and my household. But also, yes, like plants used in dyeing and textile pieces I've done are a big in my work. And some of those just are wildcrafted, meaning I'll just go into the woods and harvest them mindfully as to not overextend my visit in the woods. Or some of them are just from my garden of friends. Again, I feel like there's not much of a separation from me and my community. We're really tied together, and that could be on a micro scale or a macro scale. So micro being my family community, and my friends as more of a macro, maybe also micro community. I feel like there's not much of a separation, and every day I'm inspired by those who are in my close proximity, and I'm really honored to say that I'm in some awesome proximities to incredible, extraordinary people. So I lived in New Mexico, Taos, New Mexico, for about a year. And while living there, I connected with a woman and her partner who have lived in Oaxaca, Mexico for over a decade. And through them and our shared kind of stew pot of appreciation for the arts, I was able to connect with some paper makers in Oaxaca. And that's how I've gotten a lot of the paper I use in my bookbinding process. I went to school at the Emerson Waldorf School, and there I was introduced to bookbinding. And now that I'm in my adulthood or early adulthood, I kind of just was reinvigorated with bookbinding and the art of that. My introduction to bookbinding was in high school with one of my favorite art teachers, Miss Guinan. There I learned how to bookbind and was just introduced to the more artistic aspect of what goes into creating and binding beautiful, living vessels to hold words and such. So in my adulthood, I was kind of reinvigorated by that creation process, and thankfully had some knowledge to expand upon, and connected with some paper makers and found some awesome sources to get recycled high quality paper, and just kind of took it from there. I went full dive into bookbinding and was really inspired and continue to be inspired by the bookbinding that you can find in ancient Egypt, and just these beautiful Coptic ways of binding books. And with every journal I create, the string I use to seal off the spine, I coat in beeswax. So I'm graced to use some locally sourced beeswax to seal that string, and paper that friends of mine have made as the cover of all of my journals. So it's a very intimate process, and it has become a very intimate process for me, and it's very exciting. With every journal I create, I become very excited because I hope that people can explore themselves or their thought processes in these journals. My muse, light and how it creates color, the sun, the stars, just life is my muse. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's passionate, it's beautiful. Yeah, I guess life. I work with plant medicine, and for the past 6 years, I've actually been studying permaculture and different forms of regenerative growing and in that healing our ecosystems. That's what I was doing in Taos, New Mexico. I had the privilege of working in the high desert and beautiful alpine forests, studying the life there and just learning from the elders in that area. So plant medicine also is incorporated, I feel like, into all of what I create. My appreciation for this ancient wisdom of healing and recovery and longevity of folks through our plant allies. I was actually introduced to plant medicine on a personal level after being diagnosed with IBS and really struggling with finding any support. I fell into a more holistic, traditional approach to herbalism with a woman in Virginia who taught me and introduced me to, again, the first type of medicine, arguably. And after that, that's kind of been all I study. So introducing the different size journals that I'm offering. There are 3 different sizes. The original size. This is the first sort of dimension that I began working with. This paper was made in India. It's hand printed with a repetitive block print. Just a newsprint journal. I really enjoy slipping this journal into my pocket. I just think it's super classic and chic, just a sweet little size. So that was the medium size. The largest size is this Sirius journal named after the dog star Sirius, which is a pretty big inspiration of mine. This is some of that paper from Oaxaca. This happens to be a very heavy weight, probably 300 weight paper. It has eco print on it, and just by running my fingers across the paper itself, I can actually feel where the plant once was. It's textured really wonderfully. And this is watercolor friendly paper, as well as calligraphy pen, just very thick ink friendly paper. It does not bleed. I wouldn't even say it feathers with most inks, which is really helpful. Another little example. And all of these are bound with a very typical bind, which is called a saddle stitch binding technique, meaning that all of the signatures that make up of these journals were sewed in at one time. So all of the journals are done with the typical kind of classic saddle stitch binding technique, which essentially means that the 3 signatures in each of these journals were sewed in with one piece of string, all at the same time. So it gives us this very unique way of laying. Well, that brings me on to the smallest journal, which is the Divida size journal, which is just a perfect little square. It has the same number of pages as the original journal, which is 72 pages. Those are the 3 offerings, the 3 journal size offerings for now. Super happy to be offering them at my Muses and to share with you all today. Thank you.